The psalmist in Psalm 42 is experiencing a difficult time. He is away from Jerusalem. The circumstances play out. We don't know the precise circumstances. We just know the general circumstances are this. Here's a man who is in life, he's on a general upward climb because he is thirsting and panting. He's out of breath. He's running, okay? Whether he's running uphill or running through a valley, life is arduous right now. We know that. And he's craving, he's longing, he's desperate for a time in his life when life was not so burdensome, when he was free to go worship God. He's away from Jerusalem, so he's away from home. He's been either driven away from home, or he's in hiding, or he's captive. Something has taken him away from Jerusalem and away from the peace, the environment that he once enjoyed. So being away from home, he's longing, not just for home, but for God. He's longing for the temple worship. He's longing for those feasts and those times. He's longing for the Sabbath days with his family, where he would celebrate, he would rest. He's longing for times when he could go to the house of God and experience the voice of joy and praise. And with a multitude of people, he longs for that. Thirdly, his soul is experiencing great distress and hardship. So he describes his soul as thirsty. He describes his soul as cast down. He describes his soul as disquieted, and a second time, cast down. He describes his circumstances in life as being overwhelmed by waves and billows. So like a storm has blown into his life, or floods have flooded into his life. So he is struggling. He's struggling. Okay, he's in trouble and he's struggling. What does he do when he's struggling? He cries out to God. He journals his emotions, and he talks to his soul. We've talked about that. He differentiates his soul from his reality. We said yesterday, this psalm is a contrast of feelings versus faith, experience versus faith. What we experience in our lives as true, and what we know is ultimately and more deeply true. And he's resting his soul from the grips of his emotions, and he is crying out to God for help. He is expressing his faith. He's declaring his devotion to the Lord, but he is bouncing back and forth. So verse 9, I will say unto the God of my rock, why have you forgotten me? Why hast thou forgotten me? Why go I mourning? Because the oppression of the enemy. Verse 10, he describes it even more. As with a sword in my bones. This has pierced me deeply. What's happening in my life is discouraging me and affecting me deeply, like a sword that's going into my body. It's a deep hurt. It's a deep anxiety. It's a deep oppression and grief. Okay? Mine enemies reproach me. So this is related to people wanting him dead, people chasing him, people slandering him, people falsely accusing him. He's surrounded by people working against him in diabolical ways. When our family came to Connecticut 8 years ago this month, in fact, actually, it's 8 years ago this week. I just realized we're coming up on that. Wow. There were a lot of wonderful people in our lives that God brought here. He put people here to love us, to encourage us and comfort us, and do the work with us. And we wouldn't have survived without them, to be honest with you. It was a lonely, difficult time. But there was definitely a sense of spiritual warfare. We wrestle not against flesh and blood, but against principalities and powers. So I don't want to point to a person as the enemy, because the meanest people to us, to me, the most unkind people throughout the duration of the last 8 years have been Christians, ironically. For whatever reason, they're competitive, they're comparative, they're judgmental, on a level and in a way that other people just aren't to me. Now, even those that don't even believe like me, they tend to be more gracious and kind, unfortunately. But that's not the kind of enemy I'm talking about. I'm talking about satanic oppression, satanic warfare. And he uses people. Satan definitely uses people as the objects of the scorn and the ridicule. Our fight is never with them. We wrestle not against flesh and blood. Your enemy is your main enemy. Your main fight, your main problem is never with another person. Okay, it's always deeper and bigger than that. There's always a spiritual side to it. But it was very, very clear to me that God did not want Emmanuel to go forward. I'm sorry, that Satan did not want Emmanuel to go forward. God did want Emmanuel to go forward. I'm still consuming my coffee, so you bear with me. It was very clear to me that Satan was trying to prevent the salvation of a lot of new believers, the discipleship of a lot of new believers, and the healing of a lot of hurting Christians, and the re-engagement of a lot of dormant Christians, and the encouragement of discouraged Christians, and the sustaining of people that had been here at Emmanuel long before us, and we stand on their shoulders to this day. This has been such a team effort to see God revive and restore his church in New England, that to begin to go down the road of thanking and talking about who gets the credit. God gets the glory, and a wonderful church family gets all the credit for what God did. But there was definitely a sense of oppression at times, okay? So don't be ignorant to the fact, my friend, okay? Sometimes I'm jovial and kidding around enough that I'm trying. Laughter is the way I kind of navigate my way through life. I either have to laugh or cry, and I'd rather laugh, okay? But don't ever mistake my lightness as a lack of sobriety or lack of seriousness or lack of understanding that we are in a real, legitimate, cosmic war, okay? This is a battle, and there are enemies. And there is a target on your back today, okay? There is a spiritual enemy that longs to oppress you. And when he's getting the best of your emotions, doesn't mean you're winning the war. You're losing the war. We lose some battles. We're going to win the war, okay? But those battles for our emotions, our psyche, those battles for our faithfulness, for our hope, our day-to-day, moment-to-moment. And the enemy is tenacious to come after us in this way, like this enemy in this psalm. And they say unto the psalmist, look at verse 10, they say daily unto me, where is thy God? Now stop and think about this for a minute. Have you wondered at all in the last 6 months, where's God? What's God doing? Well, those questions often are suggestions, I believe, suggestions from Satan, okay? Suggestions from your spiritual enemies, unseen spiritual enemies oppressing your soul. What is Satan? He's the accuser of the brethren. So what's he going to do? He's going to guilt you. He's going to shame you. He's going to remind you of every time you ever failed. He's going to remind you of all of your struggles. He's going to make you feel as though God is distant and has forgotten you, okay? And this is the cry of the psalmist. Why have you forgotten me? See, his emotions are winning in this way, these negative emotions, and his enemies are getting into his head, okay? They're getting into his head. There have been some people over the years that have gotten into my head with their judgmentalism, with their public scorn and ridicule. A man or two that writes publicly and speaks publicly and condemns publicly me by name, okay? And he hasn't in a while, thank the Lord. But here's the deal. It was all a game. The man wanted headspace. He wanted to live in my head rent-free. He wanted to engage me in a fight. He wanted me to jump online and blog about him and post tweets and Facebook posts about him. He wanted to agitate me, okay? And that's what Satan wants to do. He wants to agitate you. He wants to put your soul, verse 5, disquieted, at war within you. Satan wants to do that, okay? But here's the thing. The psalmist knows he is victorious in God. God is his rock. God's loving kindness is going to take care of him. He's gonna cry out to God to help him win this part of the battle, because Satan doesn't deserve your headspace, and neither does anybody else. Okay, and it hit me one day that I can only those enemies that would slander or scorn or try to be hurtful of me or my ministry or my family, they only have the power to affect me that I grant them, that I give them. And there's a very real truth in this psalm that the psalmist only has, his enemies only have the power that he gives them to get into his head, okay? And they are getting into his head because his soul is cast down. His spirit, his soul is disquieted within him. There's a war going on within him that's related to what his enemies are saying to him and what his enemies are trying to do. And so one of the challenges today, friends, is don't let a negative voice live in your head rent-free, okay? You've only got so much mental real estate, and if you're like me, you have very little mental real estate, okay? So protect it and give your head space to the voices that speak truth. Give your head space to the voices that lift you up, that encourage you. Philippians 4:8, think on these things, okay? So David, or the psalmist's enemies, are oppressing him, they're reproaching him, and they're every day questioning God, okay? Casting doubt on God. Where's your God? Okay. Now look at verse 11. One of the most common verses in this whole psalm is the word why, okay? And here's what I want to do. I want to pause here, and I want you to think about what we've talked about today. And David's enemies, the psalmist's enemies, getting into his head, protecting your head and your mind space from those negative voices, crying out to God when Satan's getting the best of you in terms of your emotions and your headspace, and remember verse 6, I will remember thee. Okay, that's giving your headspace to God and to past victories. So spend time today remembering. But I want you to go back through this psalm and meditate on this question. The psalmist, I don't want to say David, I don't want to be presumptuous. The psalmist keeps saying, why? Verse 5, why art thou cast down? Why art thou disquieted within me? Why hast thou forgotten me? Why go I mourning because of the oppression of the enemy? Verse 11, why? Twice, why? Okay, so that's like 6 times that I count that this psalmist in a short 11 verses says why, okay? Well, the first thing that says to me is it must be a healthy thing to ask God why. Doesn't mean I'm going to get an answer, okay? He's going to give me some sense of an answer because he said, call unto me and I will answer thee and show thee great and mighty things which thou knowest not. The sense there again was call out to God and he'll give you some understanding of some things you don't know that he's doing. He'll teach you the great and mighty things he's doing. And it's a hopeful thing to know, even when I don't know what God is doing, he's doing great and mighty things. One day I'm going to look back on this and go, wow, look at what God did. That was amazing. Okay. But I want you to think about this. This is going to sound confusing. Why is he asking why? Okay. There's a couple senses of how he could be going about this. Is he saying why as in what are the reasons? Or is he saying why as in it wasn't supposed to be this way? I want you to think about that today. We'll talk about it tomorrow.